to mute your microphone unless you're speaking, and then to leave your camera on if possible. We know it's not always possible for everyone, but if you can, we want to be able to interact with each other. Wanted to name the agenda for today's meeting with you all. First, we're really excited to formally introduce our new Director of Educator Preparation. So we'll start there, and then three big topics on today's agenda. First, we will circle back to our ongoing conversation with the Epac around our educator preparation framework and the development of that framework. Also, we'll spend some good time there today. We did also want to circle back to our conversation with that really robust conversation at our last meeting around EdTPA and performance assessment. So wanted to come back together with this group as an outcome of the discussion at the December meeting and discuss next steps. And then sort of the other big topic on deck is a discussion of Epac membership vacancies and some potential next steps related to those. And then we appreciate folks who did share questions in advance of the meeting today. And so we've integrated them into this agenda where appropriate. Then we also have some room at the end, and if there's any other questions that come up from folks, please feel free to put them in the chat. And then we'll also hold some time at the end too. But first, I am going to turn it over to our new Director of Educator Preparation with the TEA, Dr. Pam Weatherington. So she's going to introduce herself. I know she's well known to many of you, but I wanted to give her the floor to get to meet everyone.
Oh, thank you, Jessica, and good morning, everyone. I am so grateful to be joining you this morning. So grateful to be a part of the TEA team, and incredibly excited to be working with you all as we aim. I know we all have a common vision, which is ensuring that every student in Texas has a well-prepared educator. So excited about our work and excited about working together as we move forward. So when I was thinking about introducing myself, I was asked, of course, to introduce myself in my first Epac meeting. And I am a former elementary ed educator. And so I thought, well, I'll use pictures to help introduce myself, which is, of course, what I've done this morning. So I'll start with, let me back up and say that I chose these pictures intentionally. I was thinking about what are some of my favorite things? Well, these are some of my favorite things to let you get to know me a little bit better. The first is the picture on the top there, which is my family. My husband and I have been married for 27 years. It'll be 28 years at the end of March. We are the proud parents of 5 kiddos, ages 35, 36 to 21. This picture that you see here was taken in 2020, September 2020. Our number 4 son and his bride were married in Florida. And so we had an opportunity to get all the family together. It was a great celebration. Side note, yes, September 2020, they were married, so amid COVID, and also a tropical storm that came through Florida that weekend. And so we joke that they have persevered all kinds of things. And so there's nothing that life can throw at them. They're going to be just great in their marriage. To the right there, intentionally a very larger picture than the other pictures, which is our first and only grandchild. Her name is Olivia Kate Weatherington. She is our greatest blessing. I tell that to my children. I tell that to everybody who wants to let me talk to them about my granddaughter. I love her so much. I've heard the love of prior to being a grandparent. I heard the kind of love that grandparents have for their children, their grandchildren. It's not a lie. It's very true. So, just adore her. The last 2 pictures that you see there, I thought I'd have a couple of pictures that would indicate my teaching experience. And so the first picture on the left there, that was a group of 4th graders that I worked with. And I chose this picture. I had other 4th grade groups, very special, very unique kiddos, but I chose this group of kiddos to surface for you this morning. I still keep in touch with many of them today. They enrolled in Disney Planet Challenge, which is an environmental project-based learning experience. And with all of their efforts to create a recycling center for their community, by the way, in a very small community rural area, we didn't have a recycling center. And so they worked throughout the entire year to do that. And in those experiences, I integrated my curriculum. So all the standards related to math and science and ELAR. I integrated the curriculum so that they could, of course, learn about the content throughout the year, but also engage in this project. Other side note, and I want to just be in super humility and say, I'm not a world-renowned teacher, but I do have such a passion for education and ensuring that all kids get what they need. And so I say that to say that through this project, I learned a lot about my fourth graders. I learned a lot about pedagogy. I learned a lot about what makes a difference in a student's life. And in this picture, I wanted to just name that they were this group of kiddos. They were named as the Southeast Regional winners for Disney Planet Challenge. There were some awards attached to that, some money that was sent to them. It's an exciting time. And also through those efforts that they did very, very well in the end of the year exam. And so I mentioned that because, again, all the pedagogical strategies that we use throughout that year, that when you attach it to students' interest, they're going to just do really well in everything that we set them up for success for. All that to say, the second picture there on the right-hand side is one of my group of teacher candidates that I had an opportunity to work with. Had many groups of candidates that I worked with throughout their preparation program. All the things that I saw happening in my students' lives in terms of their interest and their increased learning and et cetera, I wanted to take that into Epp Rep. And so I did. I had an opportunity to do that for 7 years. This one group of teacher candidates I had the chance to work with throughout their entire prep program. So first semester, junior year, last semester of senior year, throughout their elementary education program. A couple things I want to note here about this great group of teacher candidates. The first is they're happy. They're so excited. Want to know why they're so happy and excited? They had just submitted their EdTPA portfolios. Huge, huge sense of accomplishment by this group of teacher candidates. And yes, was it challenging? Yes. And they acknowledged that throughout the semester, but man, when they were done, very, very impressive. The other thing, and it's such a cause for celebration. The other thing I wanted to know too about this group of teacher candidates, our program pushed them hard. I mean, it was a challenging program, and the EdTPA, of course, challenged them as well, and other measures that we had in place. But in this group that you see right here, there are only 2 of those educators who are no longer in the classroom, and that's because they're stay-at-home moms. I say that to say that, isn't it great when we can really support our candidates and challenge our candidates and set them up for success so that they stay within the profession. So I wanted to honor them, and also, of course, other groups. They're not an anomaly. That happened with other teacher candidates as well, but that was my first group that I had a chance to really get to know and connect with throughout the entire preparation program. So thank you again for this opportunity to work with you all. Looking forward to our future endeavors. Jessica, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Pam. And we're just really thrilled to have Pam as a part of our team in the role of Director of Educator Preparation. And in her role, she's will support our Texas Educator Preparation programs, as well as support all of our certification exam development and implementation work. So we cannot be more excited to have Pam as part of the team, and you will definitely be seeing more of Pam moving forward in our Epac conversations. So I know that she'll be reaching out to many of you for individual conversations too in the future. Fantastic. Well, after that, I want to transition now to the first primary topic on our agenda today, which is a discussion of the effective preparation framework. So really here, we have a few primary goals really to discuss sort of where we've been and where we're going as it relates to the development of an effective preparation framework. So did want to just start by re-anchoring back into what I mean when I say an effective preparation framework, and then we'll talk about some of the work from there. Back in this past summer, TA staff engaged in a discussion with the board around really codifying some quality components of educator preparation programs. And this actually really stemmed from some of our initial conversations with you all as members of the Epac, who really surfaced and we said, what do you want to accomplish as an educator preparation advisory committee? A good many of you named really thinking about ways to support high quality educator preparation across the state of Texas. And really from those conversations and from conversations that the board's engaged with for a number of years around really thinking about recognizing high quality programs, thinking about flexibilities for programs who are demonstrating best practices, really came to the board came to the conclusion that it'd be useful to have a framework that allowed for us across the state of Texas to talk with coherency around those quality components of Ed Prep. Beyond sort of those like minimum compliance standards that we already have codified within our rules. And so the board named that they would really want to be able to leverage this type of framework to recognize high quality, high performing educator preparation programs. We have some of those processes already codified via our commendations process, but thought about like ways to further recognize folks who are doing great work out in the field. And then secondly, to really think about supporting APPs and continuous improvement. Recognize that our current accreditation status, if you're accredited, that's sort of the ceiling, but we recognize that there are many, many programs across the state who are doing really incredible and innovative work, or, as all strong learners do, are programs who are really seeking opportunities or guidance around areas for continuous improvement. We know we're all striving to get better in our work with that goal of ensuring that we're producing high quality educators. And so having a framework that created that aspirational bar, the board also recognized could really support an ecosystem of continuous improvement across Ed Prep. That's already been a focus in a lot of our conversations with the board to date. In initial conversations with the SBEC, staff discussed 3 potential purposes of an effective preparation framework, which the board reinforced and directed staff as we're thinking about development of an effective preparation framework to keep at the forefront of our minds. First and foremost, being a focus on building common language. So thinking about leveraging a framework where the SBEC, as they're discussing effective practices in Ed Prep, could have a common set of language. When programs are talking to one another about best practices, there's a common set of language. We're talking with LEA partners around what makes strong and effective educator preparation. There's a common language. And so really thinking about using this as a tool to really help distill down those clear, consistent, important components of effective educator preparation to help build that common language. Second, really heard loudly from the board that this could be an opportunity to leverage a framework to support continuous improvement through potentially leveraging this framework as a mechanism to recognize high performing programs and to potentially think about ways to revamp our current continuing review processes. Currently, we review every educator preparation program in the state on a 5-year cycle. And that's the review is primarily focused on adherence to administrative code, education code, our programs meeting the compliance requirements as outlined by the board. And what we've heard from many stakeholders and members of the board is that really thinking about opportunities to shift focus solely from a focus on compliance to really thinking about opportunities to shift our focus towards an ecosystem of continuous improvement and thinking about ways to leverage a framework in order to be able to do that. And then lastly, really a prioritization around alignment. So thinking about having something like an effective preparation framework, we have some clear stakes in the ground around what is best practice. That allows the SBEC to ensure that their rules align with that definition of success. It also allows TEA staff, as we're thinking about ways to leverage state dollars, or as an outcome of COVID, we had significant federal dollars, to think about ways to leverage those dollars to further support Texas preparation programs, candidates, and LEA partners in moving towards implementation and refinement of these best practices. So really thinking about alignment across the ecosystem overall. And I will name that really in our initial discussion with the SBEC around the potential development of an effective preparation framework. What we named as sort of an analogous process was a process that TEA and our Texas LEAs from across the state have engaged in over the course of the past few years to develop an effective schools framework that defined effective school-based practice. And then from there, the development of a continuous improvement process aligned to that effective schools framework. And so that's already common language across our K-12 systems, and really felt that in terms of alignment, the power to align between effective school-based practice and effective preparation practice really leads to that continuum of support for our educators across the state. So that's a little bit of context around what could be an effective preparation framework and some of the vision around how it can be used in Texas. We're still at the early stages of developing the content of that framework in and of itself. That's really where we need to begin. What are those best practices? And a few things that the ASPEC has consistently named for us in our discussions with them around the development of an effective preparation framework. It's really first and foremost been ensuring we've got a diverse set of stakeholders, with expertise in educator preparation to ensure that we're getting the necessary input, to ensure that we've got a framework that is research-based and is really grounded in those fundamental best practices. When I think about fundamental best practices, I also think about the second point, is really ensuring that the framework allows programs multiple pathways to quality. We know that there are some really foundational research-based best practices in Epp Rep. We also recognize that there are in many cases multiple pathways to implement those foundational best practices. And so wanting to ensure in a framework that we weren't shutting the door on one of our potentially effective pathways to preparation. We also heard, and this has been a consistent and ongoing theme of the board, is really thinking about strong collaboration between LEAs and EPPs, which we all know in light of COVID is even more important now than ever when we're thinking about producing high quality educators who stay in our classrooms. And so really thinking about the framework as an opportunity to make those meaningful connections and build some common language, some shared understanding of effective preparation with our LEA partners. And then lastly, and I think I already named this, heard really clearly from the board, a desire to really shift from this focus pretty solely on compliance to a focus on continuous improvement, and thinking about really leveraging this framework as an opportunity to really have meaningful conversations across the state around educator preparation program continuous improvement. We presented the board with a high-level set of stakeholder engagement activities to help develop and refine the content of an effective preparation framework. And if you all will notice, the Epac is at the top of this chart because you all are some of the primary drivers from our perspective to help support the development of an effective preparation framework. In addition, we're going to talk in just a second about another external committee that was stood up that's also been thinking about developing some draft content to be able to share back with the board, and that's Educate Texas's Teacher Preparation Regulatory Committee. And then moving forward, there's a number of different audiences trying to get as broad a statewide perspective as possible, tap into as many avenues of expertise as possible, to really thinking about, again, leveraging you all as the Epac to continue to solicit feedback from your professional organizations that many of you represent, and then also thinking about leveraging our EPP commendation recipients as well as regional feedback sessions. And then we plan on sort of closing this development process with a statewide survey to EPP faculty and staff and LEA partners to get perspective and feedback on a final framework. So really, this is going to be a robust process, and I'm going to share a little bit more in just a little bit around an updated timeline for this process going forward too. But want to first talk about the work that's already been done, because you all have already spearheaded this work. This is your initial draft content's already been shared with the board, and so don't want to name that this is a process that we're starting now. This has been happening, but wanted to circle back to it, acknowledge your great work, and then talk about how we want to continue to capitalize on that momentum moving forward. So the work that you all have engaged in to date. Back in May of 2021, it feels like potentially a lifetime ago, I recognize, we engaged in a conversation together as a committee and really began to talk about what were those components of high quality educator preparation. You all put a stake in the ground that high quality educator preparation was important to you. And so we then began the conversation around, okay, well then what are those components that really define high quality ed prep for you? From there, when we met next in August of 2021, staff had compiled all of the great components that you all initially generated and attempted to bucket it, for lack of a better word, into a set of categories. And then we spent some time together engaging in that next round of codified content and providing additional rounds of feedback. And you can see here on the left side of the slide, these were the primary areas that you all had set to prioritize. So thinking about admission, curriculum and coursework, training, supervision and support, assessment and evaluation, and P12 partnership. We brought this initial draft of the components to the SPEC in an update item in October of 2021 and named for the board that we would continue moving forward to work on the development of the effective preparation framework. So really some strong content, and we're going to share back out in just a few minutes a link to the folder that includes the draft content that you all have developed to date, so we can refresh our collective memories around the great work. Because I know if you all had the Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday like me and are coming back and being like, what did we do before the holidays? And we'll all have a chance to refresh our memory together. I did want to, though, give an opportunity. I know that we've had some questions in the past around, I named for the board that in the groups of stakeholders and audiences that were developing some potential content for the SPEC's consideration, there was also this external group that really being led by Educate Texas, who majority of you on the call know well, as a nonprofit group that's really focused on effective educator practices at the K-12 and higher ed level. And they were really interested in thinking about our educator preparation program regulations and potentially putting together a focus group or an advisory group that could provide some feedback to the board on best practices in ed prep. And so they came together and actually, based upon the shift in the conversation to the effective preparation framework, actually began to develop some recommendations and content around components of an effective preparation framework too. And so that group's been working in parallel over the course of the past few months to also develop a set of recommendations for the board's consideration. And so I invited that team to just be able to share with you all what that process looked and sounded like, so that we all had that same context as we think about sort of merging work going forward as we continue to develop out an effective preparation framework. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Priscilla from Educate Texas to take it from here and introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning all. My name is Priscilla Quino Garza, and I have the pleasure of knowing several of you, but I'm a director at Educate Texas, which if you're not familiar with us, we're a nonprofit organization that we have a parent company, Communities Foundation of Texas, which is in Dallas. And some of you may know, but our work started in the state with the development of early college high schools and T-STEM schools back in 2004, when we were called the Texas High School Project. And so I always say that our love and interest in teachers always stems from the fact that you can have all these great programs, and if you don't have the great teachers, they are all for naught. And so our work has always been about, if we're trying to serve students, how do we make sure that they have everything they need? And we have to have the best teachers in order to do that. And so our work, some of you see me testify, I'll testify at SPEC, I'll testify at the Capitol, although I'll be doing less of that, luckily. Sorry for those that will, thank you for those of you that continue that work, but I have a colleague who will be taking on more of the legislative work, who many of you know, Ryan Franklin. And so I've actually, my focus will be mainly around the state agency policy work. But I'm a former teacher as well, and that's where my heart and love always starts from. And aside from that, I'm I've just been I worked at TEA actually in this department several years ago, which is where I met many of you, including my shout out to my teacher or association folks who I've met then and continue to learn so much from, and so many of you educator preparation leaders. So just to give that background, in terms of programmatic work, we have partnerships with the Best in Class initiative that we do with the Commit partnership. We do a lot of the support work on all the college and career readiness models. And so teachers are at the center of all that work, because we can't do any of that if we don't continue to support our educators in moving forward. So when we wanted to pull this group together, part of it is we know how the state agency, is burdened with a lot of different things, and we're hoping that we can provide some resources that can help move this process along. We know all of you are burdened with a million things, and the responsibilities of Epac are vast. And so this sliver felt like something we could contribute, like if we wanted to give some ideas, and hopefully you all can make them better and stronger even from where they stand. We pulled together this group of members, and I spoke to many of, thank you. Yes, bless, that's right. We put together a group of members. I spoke to some of you as well. Otherwise, there was no way to encapsulate everyone, but we really wanted to see if we could try and get membership across the state from different organizations, both obviously at the root, our educator preparation programs, but also our LEAs who are really on the demand side of teachers and have a lot to say about what they would value in their educators coming to the profession with, as well as obviously the voice of teachers who are the ones going through your programs and then going through and trying to serve students, and other organizations that have done research and other work, of course, and supporting this particular piece of the work. So this is the membership. I have an exact list that I think I can make sure that is in the shared folks of the individuals that serve, but these were the organizations that we tried to make sure that we invited to participate and bless us with some time, because it was a saturated time period. We did all this work, and we can go to the next slide. I'm sorry, I don't know who's womaning or manning the slides. We really wanted to bring this diverse group together and talk about, we already knew where the agency was headed with many of the preparation framework requests. We've obviously followed the work through the years and wanted to say, you need a structure upon which all things are true, right? Whether it's funding, whether it's changes that you make in legislation or regulatory, right? What do we come back to? What do we stand for as an organization? For us, we see in some states that they have different things that structure that and ground all that work. And so we really hope that would be some of the work moving forward. We are a lean organization, and if you've ever worked with me, you know that I have a staff of none. And so we asked TNTP to help us with some of the facilitation and research work. And so I think Andrew and Eric are on this call, but many of you have worked with them in other capacities as well. So thank you so much, because this work could not have been done without their assistance and facilitation. We met from September to December to review exemplars, to identify best practices, and develop these recommendations. Our goal was sort of threefold. We wanted to have a vision statement. We felt like while ESPEC has a vision statement, the agency's teacher prep department doesn't per se. And so what is that statement? And so we wanted to create a draft that would help hopefully ground all that work. And then we set quality components for these three areas: preparation curriculum, training and support, progress management, and candidate development. There are many other areas that we could have zoned in on. I think we really wanted to take the cue from you all and the work that you all, the areas that you prioritize in your discussions, and hopefully add to that. We also knew that 228 was what was up for adoption too. So how do we align these items both with a framework and then the hopeful policy changes that will be coming for 228? And so we also wanted to look at policy recommendations. And so I'll speak to this a little later. We did, the group derived some as well, but in all honesty, they would need to be more aligned with an approved framework. So they align with the current recommended framework, but obviously would need to be adjusted given the updates that will come to the framework. Can I go to the next slide? So of course, we start always with the research base. And so we looked at the research about what are all the practices that tie into those 3 focus areas to meet the needs of students. We reviewed some of the state frameworks because there are some states that have teacher preparation frameworks and leading organizations, including some of you all's organizations, and you looked at that as a guide of, you know, what's consistent across many of these different organizations and what are the things that we would want to make sure that we also capture. And we also looked at the current Texas regulation. There's been a lot of change, as you all know, in teacher preparation guidance over the last 10 or 15 years in particular. And so using that as both a point of departure, but also a space to wonder, like, are these the right things? Is there too much? Is there too little? Where should we head? The committee engaged and looked at a variety of indicators in these spaces. They looked at the measures, they looked at what has shown up in these particular areas across the literature and the practitioner space. We focused both on the regulatory work and the framework broadly. And we met both asynchronously and in person and concurrently and offline. And people were asked to take 4 meetings. They definitely took more. So we appreciate all those that served on that. And then finally, we developed these different vision statements, the frameworks, and like I said, drafted some regulatory language that will definitely need some updating when the framework is adjusted. Go to the next slide. So this is the first piece, and I know that Jessica and Emily and Pam plan to share all this work with you all and have you respond to it. It's always daunting to see these sort of things, I think, in these sort of settings. So I think that my goal today was just to put it in front of you so you can see where the committee sort of landed. But I understand that Jessica's hope is to get some of your feedback and adjustments and all that into thereafter. So this is not, you know, I think it's always good to have people's gut responses, but I think the main goal of today is to share it so that it might be a starting place for the framework development moving forward. So your colleagues and other colleagues that you may not know came up with this vision for effective preparation. Teacher candidates, regardless of program and pathway, I'm sorry, I have to move something on the screen, into the field, have opportunities and support to learn, practice, reflect, and demonstrate proficiency of content knowledge, pedagogical skills, mindset, and professionalism to ensure they will effectively serve all students before they become a teacher of record. And so this was the language developed by the committee. Always wordsmith, and you know, that's fun. So I will look forward to supporting Jessica as she continues to wordsmith all that. But I think this is where the vision landed for this committee. We can go to the next. We divided the framework development piece into 2 sides of it. This was the first part of it, which is the essential actions. And they were followed. And like I said, I think that you all have not seen them, but I think they're sending you the documents. They were followed by a longer list of effective practices that live underneath each one of these actions. And so while there were many actions originally developed by the group, these were the ones that rose to the top for each of the different focus areas. And so I don't want to read them all, but as you can see, the first is related to field-based experience and opportunities. The second is discussing the competencies that are based in to effective teaching practices and are based on research-informed practices. And lastly, it's the preparation of diverse needs of all learners. And so underneath each one of these, there's a list of practices that the committee felt would support this essential action that's necessary for a teacher to enter the field. We go to the next slide. The training and support, should be of no shock, was the longer one. And also had to be prioritized. So we landed on the 5 top ones that the group felt was important. I think the real balance was trying to find things that were both, we know are based on best practices, but are also aspirational and bold, right? Like, we want the best in Texas. We want our teachers to be as prepared and supported as possible. And so some of that is articulating things that we assume as educators and as supporters of educators that we are already doing, but putting it to, you know, I guess I used to say pen to paper, but I guess that's not appropriate anymore. You know, words to screens to make sure that we support the work that we want educators to leave preparation component of their careers with. And so around, again, this field-based experience that's coherent and aligned to standards and competency, not just, can you get it on a piece of paper, but do you actually know what it looks like? Giving folks opportunities to really improve their skills and make sure that they are in different settings. Because I think one of the big conversations, and I know many of you have had it, is sometimes we put teachers in spaces that they're not going to wind up working in. And then it's a shock to the system when they are hired for schools that they've never, sorry, I have a cat, that do not reflect the same needs of the students that they trained with. Also looking at those partnerships between districts and mentor teachers and all the different support staff that are really there to serve teachers, and making sure that the supervisors and all the faculty that are working with the teacher candidates are using similar tools and frameworks to drive coaching practices and feedback. And lastly, looking at how this work is gradual, right? Like I can say I only taught for 5 years, and every year felt like a new year, and every semester felt like a new semester. And how do we support that work when we know that folks, they may teach at different spaces, and how do we make sure that they have those experiences so they can really grow and develop into the type of educator that they're going to need to be. And then the last essential action area, we can go to the next slide, is around progress management and candidate development. Obviously, educator preparation programs want to know that their candidates are moving along the trajectory. And so just making sure this seems like common sense, right? Like that it's aligned, and that mastery of content and pedagogical skills and mindsets and professionalism are all there, because it's not just, you can't have one of these and be a successful teacher, you need all of them. And then making sure that's candidates receiving the type of regular actionable feedback and coaching that they really need to continue to develop through their preparation time. And lastly, that there's program monitoring that's really relevant and valuable and allows for improvement, isn't just compliance-based and or just it's done, but it doesn't necessarily reflect change and shifts and needs for that candidate. And then if we go to the last slide. So I just want to share that. I can pause there. Jessica, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted me to share or address.
No, thank you, Priscilla. I really appreciate you being willing to come and share the context of the group's work to date and provide that overview. And as Priscilla shared, we are going to share out, and we'll put it in the chat, a link to both the content that you all as Epac have developed to date, and as Priscilla shared, the draft documents that this regulatory committee put together so far. So as Priscilla named, they identified those sets of essential actions that she included on the slide, but there's additional specificity. So we wanted to be able to share that back with you all at the Epac as well, so that we're all on the same page around the generative content that's been developed across our Texas educator landscape as we think about moving forward in terms of next steps with the framework development. So appreciate that. And we're gonna, thanks, Pam. So Pam put a link in the chat to a folder that has 2 subfolders in it. One is labeled Epac and one is labeled Regulatory Committee or something along those lines. And that includes all of the draft documents. And those are going to be important for us as we talk about next steps together as a committee. I don't think it's probably the best use of our time to do collaborative reading at the moment. So I'm just going to name bookmark that link, and we'll give y'all an opportunity at the outcome of this meeting to dig into some of those documents. And we'll ask you to take some next steps around them as we move forward. And I would name that, and Priscilla, hopefully I'm not speaking out of bounds here, but if there's any questions that you all have as you're looking through the content that was developed by the regulatory committee, I'd say reach out to us, and we're always happy to connect you all with Priscilla and the TNTP team that helped develop some of this work. And if there's any other questions too, there were some, looking at the list of folks who participated in that committee, there's some great folks there that I know also if folks had additional questions that they wanted to ask some committee members, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think that many of them would be willing to speak with folks too. So definitely a collaborative environment here for sure. So moving forward, we wanted to touch on two big topics. One, what the development timeline looks like moving forward, a draft timeline that we're going to discuss with the Epac at our February meeting, and then discuss some preparation over the course of the next few Epac meetings. So I'll name, there's a lot of words on this slide. It's a calendar chart that spans 2 columns. I'm just going to hit the high points for you all. I think the original proposal that we had for the SBEC was that we were going to have a final effective preparation framework. I think we said by like February. I sometimes recognize that sometimes ambitious and feasible need to be considered at the same time. Sometimes I don't think about those two in the same time, and recognizing the pretty significant impact that a framework like this can have across the state and really the meaningful utility of it. We want to move at the speed of quality here. We want to ensure that we're developing a high quality product that can really have meaningful uses across our Texas preparation programs in the field more broadly. And so we want to go slow here to make sure we're really getting all the perspective, feedback, insight that's necessary to make sure that across the state, we really feel confident in this framework and confident in what this framework can mean for Texas preparation. So that's my long way to say that now our proposal back to the SBEC is that to really take this calendar year to do 2 primary things. Collaboratively work to develop a strong draft of an effective preparation framework. And similar to actually what Priscilla shared just a little bit ago, once we clearly put a stake in the ground around those components of an effective preparation framework, and the boards really said, yes, these are those components of quality that we're prioritizing. Also thinking about ways to leverage that, to think about how there's alignment between what we believe to be, what we know and what research tells us are quality practices and what's reinforced within our Chapter 228 rules and potentially other chapters of rule. So thinking about starting with the end in mind, starting with best practice, and then also thinking about recommendations to the board around ways to update, streamline, et cetera, their rules and regulations to ensure that we're reinforcing those components of best practice. And so over the course of this calendar year, plan to engage across a variety of stakeholder groups to solicit feedback around the content of the framework, and then to also solicit feedback on any adjustments to the rules in alignment with that vision for best practice. So you can see sort of how we've aligned that over the course of the calendar year. And I would say the big theme here is you can see that we've stamped Epac meetings across the entirety of this year. This is the group we're going to consistently, you all are the SBEC's advisory committee. So we're going to consistently come together, anchor in this work. I'm really looking to you all for your leadership, expertise, and guidance as we think about the development of a framework and think about some of the other updates and recommendations we could provide the board around updates to their rules. So essentially here we're aiming for December 2022, where we would actually begin to discuss potentially Chapter 228 items to actually implement an effective preparation framework within SBEC rule. So what comes next? Again, as we've shared, you all already have a really strong foundation of the work, been guiding this process to date. We have the benefit of having some external groups as well, also generate some rich content for reflection and consideration. And so really looking to you all as the Epac as we move forward in development from this point forward. And so we have an ask for you all between now and our next 2 meetings together. What we're going to ask for you all to do, we know that many of you in your role here on the Epac are members of professional organizations. And really our vision for the Epac was to say sort of like a spoken wheel for you all to be a part of the Epac, but also as members of your professional organizations to be able to bring content back to the broader professional organization to solicit broader feedback, insight, input, etc. And so that's really what we're going to be asking here with the development of next steps with the framework. We're going to ask for you to bring the content of the draft frameworks back out to your professional organizations. And if you're a member of the Epac, not necessarily representative of or a partner within a professional organization, but also bring it out to your colleagues or other organizations that you belong to. We ask for you to bring the content back out to your professional organizations and your colleagues and really provide feedback on the content that's been developed to date. Are there opportunities to refine or prioritize some of those key levers or those big picture buckets that we've identified, or some of the essential actions that fall under them? Are there ways to add additional specificity in what we call key practices, so those more granular practices? And so really soliciting that feedback, any additional research foundation that reinforces the most foundational key practices, what we'll be asking for you all to generate with your organizations. We recognize that this is a process that's going to take a little bit of time. And so in just a few slides, I don't want to give it away, Christy's going to share the updated Epac meeting calendar for 2022. And so we do plan on having an Epac meeting most likely around February 25th. And so at that date, we'll ask for folks, we're not going to expect you to have a finished product by February 25th, that's in a month. But we will be asking for kind of like a progress update, if there's any barriers, things that folks are thinking, if there's any best practices that you all have discovered in bringing these out to your professional organizations, we'll have sort of a collaborative update. And then we'll ask for any sort of like final recommendations or codify the great input that you've gotten from your professional organizations by April 1st. So it gives you some solid time to be able to work with your organizations, work with your colleagues to generate some input and feedback. What TEA staff will do from there is do another round of compilation. So take all of the good work that you've developed after April 1st and put that together for Epac's review and reaction during the next meeting. So in advance of the next meeting, ideally by May 1st, we would send back out a compiled updated draft based upon the collaborative work across the professional organizations for you all to review. You all can see sort of the source material across professional organizations and then sort of the final compiled product. And then we'll spend our May Epac meeting diving really deep into the updated content and really getting that feedback, because from May onward, that's where in our plan, we would then bring out this updated draft to some of those other stakeholder groups to get additional feedback and context. I will pause there before we go to the next topic. As in terms of next steps, I know seeing something on the slide is one thing, but we will send a follow-up email as an outcome, hopefully by Friday at the very latest, that will outline all these directions that we've included in this deck. We will relink the link to all of the draft materials and give directions for how to update the documents, the sort of the naming conventions we've been using, and ways to upload again. So we will share all of that out in a follow-up email to you all. But again, feel free to always follow up with us if you have additional questions around the content or the directions. But
hey, Jessica,
yeah,
this is Mark Terry with principals, elementary principals. So what I'm hearing is you are going to send out some draft material and some I don't know, information for us to share with our members to get specific feedback on particular parts of it. Is that correct? Or do I need to generate what you are sharing and then redo it to send out to my members?
No, great question, Mark. No, so we'll send to you all the current draft content.
Okay.
And so really from there, if there's, I envision folks may approach this differently depending upon their professional organization. Folks might make this a topic of discussion in an upcoming meeting that they may have. Others may send this out via more of like a survey. I think there's probably multiple approaches to solicit feedback. I think depending upon the structure of professional organization, but we'll send the content of the frameworks themselves and some specific guiding questions around areas for feedback. But if there's any, I'll name that once we send that, if there's any other sort of like additional guidance, or if there's other tools that we can help generate that help you all solicit that feedback from your organizations, we're happy to work together to think about a good approach to be able to do that.
Jessica, it's Holly. I also had a question about the process. So as of this point, there's the work that sort of our initial work we did, where we just were kind of brainstorming and putting on virtual sticky notes, our thoughts on quality ed prep. And then you compiled that into a document. I believe you shared that with us some months ago. So that's what's in the Google Drive, that document. And then there's Educate Texas's draft that they have. Is there going to be any attempt to like crosswalk those two at least, so that we know right off the bat if there's any, commonality? Or tell me, I'm just kind of wondering what could be done to kind of facilitate, instead of looking at everything just from the get-go, having some sort of crosswalk to identify commonalities might be helpful.
That's great feedback, Holly. We can definitely do a crosswalk across the two if that's helpful to just sort of like as a springboard for additional conversation. We can definitely do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then when you talk about refine and prioritize current prioritized levers and essential actions, what are you referring to there?
Holly, I was like, I need to come back around and name why I have these maybe convoluted names for these sections. So when we talk about common language, what we've been attempting to do to the extent possible is align some of the structure and like naming conventions of this framework with the current frameworks that are used at the campus and district level too. So the Effective Schools framework uses specific sort of naming conventions for the sections of the framework. So they've got prioritized lever, that's like basically, for lack of a better word, the highest, like the big buckets. And then they've got like essential actions, which are sort of the next layer of specificity. And then they've got like underneath each one of those essential actions, key practices, which are the more like granular descriptions of what that looks like in action. So what we'll send with the directions for this, along with that crosswalk, I'm also going to send just like a one-pager that actually sort of like defines the different layers of the framework. We thought it's useful to be able to speak from that same kind of like common language perspective across the frameworks, but just a naming convention.
Jessica, if I may, I just want to also share, Holly, those sticky notes that we wrote, remember when we put all of those together, those were kind of the base and foundation of what we started with on that regulatory committee with Educate Texas. So when we do pull together a crosswalk, you're going to see just about every one of those sticky notes show up somewhere, because that was like the base of how we got to the next set of, it was almost like a layering, if you will. And then I may be a little bit of an anomaly in this group because I work very closely with the Effective Schools framework in my portfolio of work, as well as this. And so what I would say, Holly, just for simplification, there is a specific, all of these like prioritize levers, essential actions, all that, it's just the way that it's organized. It's the way the framework is organized. So they aren't real, quote unquote, until we identify what those things are. You get what I'm saying? So they're basically categories, if you will. But I will say to the group that it has been extremely helpful in my other portfolio of work to have that Effective Schools framework, because it gives us such a great place to start every conversation when we're getting ready to either help districts with incentivized essential actions, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like this is going to be really, really helpful for us to get that alignment piece around this preparation work. I've just seen it really just accelerate the impact of the work by having that effective schools framework. And I'm hoping the same thing happens with the effective preparation framework.
Great. Yeah, thank you for letting me know that the Educate Texas committee kind of used our work to springboard off. That's helpful. Thank you, Dominique.
Thanks, everyone. Additional questions that folks have or feedback on the process? Excellent. So take this feedback. We'll put together sort of the directions, next steps, that guidance as we shared. And then again, if there's any additional clarification, any additional tools that could be useful in this process, y'all know where to find us. We're always happy to work together to ensure that we're developing a really strong framework here. And I echo Dominique's view. I think if we have a really clear set of prioritized best practices, I think it opens up opportunities for really meaningful conversations across the state. So really excited about this work moving forward. To give you all, I think I named it, but just want to stamp it again. We will have a discussion item at the February meeting where we'll be presenting this updated development timeline and providing the board with just a reminder of the work that's been done to date. And again, our plans for the work moving forward. So the board will be kept updated here. And then we do plan on most likely another update item after we've all come together in May to discuss sort of like an updated version of the content. So most likely again at the July meeting, I think the plan would be by then we'll have had an opportunity to go out to some of those other groups for feedback, and hopefully by July have a pretty solid draft to be able to put in front of the SBEC to get their directional approval and feedback and guidance, so that we can really sort of feel confident in the product that we've collectively are developing, so that we're more in the refinement stage and can really shift our focus as a team towards some of that update to the regulations as needed in alignment with those prioritized best practices. So just to kind of give you all a sort of like the overarching where we're going from here again. With that, did want to pivot to the next topic that's on our agenda for today, which is to circle back to our conversation from, was it October, November? I don't know, y'all, all the months are mixing together, but before the December SBEC meeting, and to have a discussion around performance assessments for certification and specifically at TPA. So here, did want to circle back to our discussion of subject-specific performance assessments. I did want to provide a little bit of an overview of the discussion at the December SBEC meeting. Just name, really appreciated. Many of you here on the line were at the SBEC meeting, and so you all engaged in this work firsthand, but just will name that the rich discussion that we had here together as a group really informed the approach to the discussion with the board in December. So just want to echo and just rename my appreciation for our robust dialogue, because I think it really helped carry forward into that meeting. And so I want to just debrief a little bit around the board's directives coming out of that meeting, and then discuss some next steps for February and then beyond as it relates to performance assessments for certification and specifically implementation of EdTPA. So first and foremost, as we shared at the December meeting, that staff did plan to bring forward a proposed rule text to replace the PPR with the EdTPA and discuss associated timelines at the February SBEC meeting, and that is the plan moving forward. So a little bit of discussion around what occurred actually during that meeting. So during the meeting, there was an opportunity for members of the Epac. Dr. Ward had an opportunity to share some of the updates in our last discussion around alternative certification exams. And we also had members of the team from Sam Houston State University who have a pilot of a local performance assessment, shared some updates around their work. We had some pretty rich, robust public comment at the December meeting, and then really sought guidance from the SBEC around next steps. And what we heard loud and clear from the board was sort of a two-step set of directives. First, to bring forward rule text to implement EdTPA. And then second, because we do not want to close the door on alternatives. I think we heard that loud and clear from the board. We've heard feedback from the fields that there is a desire for there to be an opportunity for alternatives if and when they meet the board's expectations for high quality performance assessment certification exams. So a tool that can be used for educator certification. We do not want to close the door on those options. We just recognize that there's only one of those options that's ready right now for adoption, which is EdTPA. So we also heard clear direction from the board to codify a process to vet and approve additional performance assessment certification exams. And so recognizing that sort of like 1-2 step of actions, we also received a set of requests for additional information or additional opportunities for discussion from the Epac during that meeting. We heard from the Epac they wanted to learn more about plans to address cost concerns related to EdTPA or really any performance assessment, discuss EPP accountability for candidate EdTPA performance. We heard from some of our board members that they'd like to go back and actually look at the current PPR exam content. It's been a while since they took it, I think more than one board member said. There was definitely an interest in learning more about the standard setting process for the EdTPA. And then LEA communication plans, both in terms of EdTPA implementation more broadly, and then implementation timelines for EdTPA and timelines for this codification of a process to vet additional performance assessment certification exams. There was also a request from more than one board member for a work session. And so we have tried to move heaven and earth to allow for a work session in advance of the February meeting. So we do plan on having a work session with the board on February 10th, specifically with an EdTPA and performance assessment focus. The topics that were requests for additional information or discussion will be on the table during that work session and or will be discussed during the February 11th meeting. The intent of the work session is really to, again, based upon board member requests, take a look at some of the exam content itself, discuss some of those implementation timelines and feedback from stakeholders, and then really to spend some time soliciting Epac member input around this second step of codifying a process to vet and approve additional performance assessment certification exams, really getting clarity on the board's criteria. Liz, I see you have a question before we move on. I may address it in the next sections, but want to see if you can name it now, and then if you don't mind, I'll let you know if I'm going to address it after this. But you want to share your question?
Sure. So it seems that from the second item that the only option is a certification exam. That is not what the Sam Houston pilot has proposed. So does that mean that something at the that a portfolio-based assessment that is not a certification exam is not going to be an option?
Appreciate that, Liz. So this is exactly the language that we shared with the board at the meeting. We've heard from the board that they are interested in performance assessments that are used for certification. And so again, as we think about criteria and vetting, we want to hear from the board more information around their expectations. That will be our discussion with them in February, is really drawing those lines around what are expectations, what are their expectations, what is their criteria. Definitely heard from the board that they had interest in the work that Sam Houston State has done to date, but also heard from the board really a reinforcement of their statutory charge, where they're ultimately the arbiters of who receives a license to teach in the state of Texas. And so really trying to balance all of those considerations. And so we'll take some dedicated time at the work session to discuss that further. Circling on to actually a little bit of a deeper dive into what will be discussed at the February meeting. Did want to name for this group what will be a component of the February Epac proposal. So based upon feedback from the Epac and from stakeholders, the The February agenda will include an item that will propose amendments to Chapter 230, which is our chapter that governs educator certification exams in part. And so first and foremost, there's proposed amendments to 230.21, which is our educator assessment section. Primarily those amendments are to the testing figure. If you all live in the world of TAC, as some of us do, we've got a big old chart in this chapter that says, if I'm getting this certificate, these are the exams that I need to take. And that's primarily what's being updated to implement EdTPA. In addition, there's a few other minor edits to 230.21, specifically around the length of time that a certification exam can be used for issuance of a certificate after that certification exam ends, and some other sort of like small edits to rule based upon feedback we received from the fields, but ultimately primarily an update of that testing figure that ultimately operationalizes EdTPA as the pedagogy exam requirement. So we'll sunset the PPR exam, and I'll share a little bit more around some updates to that based upon stakeholder feedback. In addition to implementing and operationalizing EdTPA as the pedagogy exam requirement, we've also embedded opportunities for EPP flexibility and candidate choice in EdTPA exams. Specifically, what this looks like primarily is allowing for choice among EdTPA handbooks for course subjects EC6. Throughout the pilot, there was just one handbook that candidates can use for certification purposes. That we heard feedback from stakeholders and in some instances that did not always align with the candidate's placement for their clinical teaching or internship. So we provided additional flexibility there to support alignment. And then also some flexibility with some of our CTE fields as well. And then finally, we have updated the EdTPA implementation plan specifically based upon stakeholder feedback. So that's what I'm going to circle to next. Holly, I see your hand. I'm going to come to you in just a second. Just want to round out these thoughts. So just wanted to name that our original draft plan for EdTPA implementation was a proposal of non-consequential implementation in beginning 22-23, where we would require all first-time test takers to take EdTPA. So basically the only folks who wouldn't have been allowed, who would be allowed to continue with the PPR would be those who had tested on the PPR before the beginning of the 22-23 academic year. We had then proposed 23-24, everyone was required to take EdTPA, and then 24-25, everyone would be required to take EdTPA and it would be consequential for candidates. In our original draft, we were also silent on accountability for EPPs related to candidate scores on EdTPA. And so based upon the discussion with members of the board during the meeting and other stakeholders, we have updated this timeline to provide a little bit more flexibility for programs and candidates, and to also clarify accountability requirements for programs. So we'll present an updated implementation plan to the board in February that's also reflected in the rule text. And the biggest changes to that implementation plan are what we would propose would happen in 22-23. And that's really two big changes. First, rather than EdTPA be required for all first-time test takers, instead, EdTPA would be an option as an assessment in addition to the PPR throughout the 22-23 academic year. This would give EPPs an opportunity to potentially pilot EdTPA if they have not engaged with EdTPA at all to date across the years of the pilot. It would give programs an opportunity to pilot EdTPA with a subsection of their program potentially, or to provide additional decision points for programs around if they would choose to engage in EdTPA in the 22-23 academic year, again, providing that flexibility and that opportunity to pilot before they scale. Secondly, we clarify that EPPs would not be held accountable for candidate performance on the EdTPA during the 22-23 academic year. We would engage in rulemaking over the course of the next year to codify EdTPA as a component of ACEP And then that would be effective as of 23-24. So programs would be held accountable for candidate performance on EdTPA once it was a requirement for all candidates to take the EdTPA. Before I transition over to Zach's question, Holly, question that you had.
Yeah, okay, you've had draft rule text on this before that we've seen, right? So, where you've updated the testing chart and that kind of thing. So the draft rule text that you're describing is something we've actually probably seen before.
So Holly, so you've seen the rule text in which we've implemented the EdTPA as it into the test chart. I'll say the only real difference in terms of the rule text that's being presented to the board in February is that we're striking the words pilot exam from EdTPA in the majority of the sections, and then adding a date by which PPR will no longer be operational. And then there's a few other sort of small edits, but all of what's being described was presented to the board in the discussion item in December. Outside of these small edits that we've made based upon SPEC member and stakeholder feedback.
But the bottom line on the timeline is that the consequences of it, EPPs will be held accountable for EdTPA a year earlier than under the original timeline?
Great question, Holly. No, it's actually a year later. So originally, guidance I named for the board, we were actually silent on this in the actual item itself that we discussed in December, but I received a question from Dr. Rodriguez around would programs be held accountable for EdTPA? And my framing at that time was, because we're striking the word pilot exam, then de facto, my understanding at that time was that EdTPA then would be like a component of a program's ASAP accountability system. But recognize that, and I'll name for the board that this was my error, and we've updated that in the item that we have in February. It does require some rulemaking in chapter 229 to specifically integrate EdTPA into ASAP because of the way that we have framed the buckets in ASAP. If you know our indicators, they say PPR exams and non-PPR exams. And so we need to update sort of the way that those buckets are framed into pedagogical and content pedagogy exams. And so we'll engage in that rulemaking, which would then allow for the accountability for programs to begin in 23-24.
Okay, but so the slide you have up on the left-hand side was about consequential implementation for the candidates, not for the EPs.
Correct. Yeah. And so that's the one thing I'll name, Holly. So in 23-24, this middle year, programs would be held accountable for candidate performance on EdTPA, but EdTPA would still be de facto pass-fail. So they'd be held accountable for candidate performance, but we wouldn't have a cut score on it. Yeah. Similar to how I would name that during this past year, programs were held accountable for candidates' performance on STR, even during that introductory period where it was pass-fail. Just happened that majority of our candidates passed during that pass-fail period. Was that lower threshold to get over the passing line. But so there's precedent for us implementing a process like that with sort of having this like lower introductory period, still holding programs accountable, and then moving towards actually a codified set standard. All right. Zach, I appreciate you sharing this question with us. I don't know if I fully clarified it based upon the discussion around the updated timeline, but I wanted you to be able to speak to the question that you shared and then see if there's any additional framing or clarification that I can provide.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. I guess is rule text that is going to be provided in February, is that in the draft? Is that a discussion or a proposal item?
Great question. So it's a proposal item.
Because you're assuming, okay, because the December would have been the discussion, proposal, correct. February, adoption, April, with implementation June-ish.
Yep, so effective as of post SBOE, which would be sometime in July.
So that's helpful. I was off on I was a board meeting behind on my timeline. And then just so I'm clear, 22, 23, non-accountable, 23, 24, programs are accountable, but on a pass fail. And then 24, 25, programs are accountable with cut score.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Absolutely. Anything else, Zach, before we circle around? Awesome.
No, thank
Liz, oh, thanks. Liz, I see your hand raised.
Yes, I was just wondering if SBAC or TEA has looked at the announcement that came out from New York the Monday after the SBAC meeting, where New York is eliminating EdTPA and moving to an EPP-based portfolio assessment. And they specifically mentioned that from the beginning of EdTPA implementation, there was a safety net. Since TEA seems to be going forward with this, are you communicating with New York to see how that safety net worked and how it can be implemented?
Liz, I'm glad you asked that. No, we're definitely aware of the steps that we're taking in New York, and actually have some connector emails out to their group right now. So hoping to have conversations with them in the next week or so. But certainly well aware of their policy. All right, y'all. And so then the last thing just wanted to name was that we will be moving forward as well. Again, recognizing the SBEC's directive around the both and approach, not wanting to close the door on additional options. That essentially, as we move forward, really want to work with you all as the Epac to really support the development and provide feedback on the criteria that will be leveraged to vet and approve additional performance assessment certification exams. So this will be, we do anticipate our primary topic of our next Epac meeting at the end of February. So we will be sharing pre-work, some guiding questions, soliciting some of your feedback in advance of that February conversation. So we can really dig into this primarily during that February time, since we're going to be saving our EPF discussion for our May meeting. So anticipate us really rolling up our sleeves together. We'll have some good direction from the board as an outcome of the work session, and then we can kind of roll up our sleeves together around it and engage in further discussion from that point moving forward. And then anticipate hopefully bringing forward some of these recommendations to the board in the ongoing update as well. With that, I am going to turn it over to Christy to talk through our next topic.
Thanks so much, Jess. And now you can sit back and drink some Diet Coke, and your job is done for the day, except for if you don't mind advancing my slide, that would be great. As you all aware, the SBEC has to be the determiner and the approver of every advisory committee. And as you know, last year they recomposed the Epac as you all are the family, and that throughout the year there has been a couple of vacancies. And in preparation of the SBEC actually approving any updates to the Epac, and I do want to share that moving forward, what we would like to do with the board, even though their actual approval will be on a biannual basis, is that go ahead and have them approve alternates at that same time. So in the event that there's a vacancy, we don't have to wait for the SBEC to approve, just to make sure that we are, fully staffed here. So here is who I have right now as current vacancies for the EPP rep. As you all know, when we got blessed with Dr. Galvan coming onto the SBEC, that has allowed there to be an EPP representative vacancy. We do still have nomination forms and applications when we did do the original call out at the end of 2019 that we'll still be able to tap into as we have promised those nominees. And then the two professional organizations that we have are the Texas Association of Secondary School Principals, which was vacated by Cindy Jackson, And then the Texas Consortium of Educator Preparation Programs for ESCs vacated by Dr. Melinda Barnett. And as you know, that professional organizations have got the discretion to name their actual representatives. So we'll be tapping those organizations to see who they would like to put forward for the aspects consideration. What I want to ask you all today is, as we are preparing the slate, is if there's any other vacancies that you're aware of, since we really, only want to bring this to the board, once a year. We'd really like to make sure that we've got our full staff. Dr. Ward, did you have a question on any of this so far?
Yes, I do. I appreciate the fact that you want to go ahead and have a second person that's already approved in the event that someone is unable to fulfill their role. My question is, like, I know Cynthia Savage couldn't be here today. She's the Epac representative, and it's because she's teaching class.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that if there's a second person approved, if someone has a conflict, that the second person could step in for that meeting with the first person having the charge of primarily attending the meeting?
That's exactly right. And that's the other thing that we're aiming for, is that, not only do we have people that have been permanently have stepped down from their respective positions, but also in the event that they're not able to attend. So this is definitely something that we want to have a discussion with the board on. Having those alternates that are already named, I think will give us that opportunity. And then, just like you said, to make sure that the primary person, only if that primary person is not able to attend, then their alternate. But thank you so much for that feedback. So I think it's going to be important for the board to hear from Epac members, is that, us, like I said, us being fully staffed actually is the most fruitful, beneficial conversations that we can have as we dig into the aspects topics. So, and I'm going to be sending out an email with the slide deck as well after this meeting. But in the event that there are other vacancies, or you have any other ideas, please let me know when I send that email in the next couple of days. So Jessica, the next big topic. So for your Epac meeting dates for 2022, as you all know, what we naturally do is do a 2-week cadence after each aspect meeting. And I know it seems like we are always together, and we are so blessed to always be together, but we really did want to make sure that this was very meaningful, to where we had touch points with you all in between each aspect meeting. And I know that our last couple of Epac meetings have really focused on EdTPA and the EPF, because those are heavy policy lifts. But we will be going back to, giving you all kind of a front and center of what is coming down the path for the aspect meetings, letting you all have some idea of what's coming to the aspect, but also having some, directives from the aspect on where they would love for you all to dig in a little deeper. And so this, again, I will also send with the email. The one thing I did want to point out is I do recall that there was some squishiness of the August date. I think just because people getting back into the rhythm of, opening their schools. So this is not hard and fast. This is what we have. This is why, I think we are going to go ahead and stay virtual until things, finally calm down, because we definitely don't want to have, only 2 or 3 people that can attend, in person, because it is so important that every single person can be here. And that's been one of the biggest blessings of all of this, is that we're able to tap some of our classroom teachers, and some that don't have the availability to travel into Austin. And everyone's voice is so imperative that we really don't want to lose that flavor. As much as we do miss seeing people face to face, we do not miss sharing the virus. So I can tell you that we do not want to promote. But with that, again, I will put this in the email, and that if there's any red flags or things that I have missed when I've just been, throwing together some dates that kind of made sense to us in the moment, would definitely welcome your feedback on that.
And Christy, one of the things that I've had to push myself to remember is all the different conferences and weekend events for different organizations across the state, because oftentimes that becomes a conflict. So I would just encourage everybody on the call, if you know about all these, meetings that you guys are going to probably attend at some point, we should probably just kind of think about those too, so that those aren't conflicts.
Dominic, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. That is something that, we always put certain things into our calendars, but, especially knowing it from the summer into the fall, you're exactly right. There are a lot of conferences. I think that's what happened last time with CISO. And so thank you so much for noting that. We'll definitely go back and do a crosswalk with all of the conferences that we're aware of, but you're exactly right. All the brilliance on this committee, I know, will help us to make sure if there's anything else that we've definitely taken that consideration, because we want this to be as easy for you to attend as possible, because we, having, like I said, the full attendance is definitely a blessing for us. So thank you for that, Dominique. Anything else? Okay, so Kevin is putting some stuff in the chat. Thank you so much. I will hold on to those and go, like I said, go back and do a crosswalk, clean this up, and then be sending out that email this week so you all can definitely have a better idea and then have some time to weigh in on those dates. All right, so Epac member questions. So we did receive, Jess, if you want to go ahead and advance it, other than Zach's question, thanks so much for that, Zach. We did receive one more question from Andrea Chevalier. Dr. Chevalier, are you on with us?
I'm here.
So would you like, do you want me just to say it? Do you want to kind of speak to this?
Sure, I can. We have been trying to gather a lot of input about the reading academies that were established by HB3 and the requirements to complete those. And some of our educators were wondering about the ability to have something on their certificate to show their completion of the reading academy, because it's so much work that they're putting in to do that. And so it made me think of the micro-credential. And I just wanted to see like what an update on the implementation of that and what steps would need to be taken for educators to have that micro-credential on their certificate, just to give them something to show for completing the reading academy.
First, thank you so much, because I know that you and I have had several conversations about the micro-credentials. Just a little history for the Epac is during the 86th legislative session, House Bill 2424 required that the SBEC create a pathway for micro-credentials for every certificate class, only if funding was available. There was a pretty hefty fiscal note attached. And as you know, that there was not funding that was made available for this. And so it's something that has not left our radar, and making that connection and that intersection with HB3 with the reading academies, we know has been a topic that has been discussed as well. And so if you allow us, for staff to just, keep exploring that. And again, I think it's because it's such a huge fiscal note, as well as if it's a micro-credential, it has to be owned by the SBEC, which means the SBEC has to approve the actual providers and actually has to be the one that provides that stamp on the certificate, which means they have to be able to demonstrate the skills and the competencies by completion of those academies. So there's kind of some other multi-layers with House Bill 2424 that when putting it as a micro-credential puts it under the umbrella of the SBEC, provides a little bit more complexities that we would have to work through. So those reading academies, like are not directly under the purview of SBEC, that under SBEC at all. And so trying to find that that intersection. Totally understand where the ask is. That's something that has been surfaced since the Reading Academies were a requirement, is how will educators, demonstrate that they have completed it. So let us keep talking about it, and I will get with Emily and see if we can, get you an agency response to that in particular. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. And that gives me some more information about, if we need to really advocate for funding. It sounds like that's kind of the big barrier here. So thanks.
You bet. Yes, and let's have a conversation, because, other than just the funding, if it's going to be a micro-credential that's lived under Epac, and Epac does not have the oversight over the academies, I think there may be, some better places that could actually help you get to where you all are wanting to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
You bet. Are there any other questions for the good of the group? It is 11:35. Y'all are about to get some lunchtime back, which may be kind of odd for you all to not have a working lunch, but would love if you have any other questions for the team, whether it be something we've already discussed, or if there's anything else for the future for our April meeting. Would love to go ahead and put that on our radar so we can start working on that. And feel free to put it in the chat as well. So Jessica, I think that ends my show.
All right, Christy, then I guess that ends the whole show. We really appreciate y'all taking time out of your busy days to come and collaborate and thought partner with us. And so look forward to connecting over the course of the next few weeks. And again, as Christy shared, look for an email from us by end of this week that includes all those next steps related to the effective preparation framework, as well as some requests around Epac member vacancies. But really appreciate your time today. Oh, I do see a question in here. Gina, I'll follow up with you to share a little bit more around some of the ways that we're using ESSER funding. Thank you for that question. Thanks, y'all.